Our topic today is Tabula Rasa. Will the world of gaming turn upside down? Whoa, that's a deep one, isn't it? The basic idea of this panel is that we are now expecting some paradigm shifts, not only for the industry, but also for game development as a craft some way. And we want to dive deeper into that. So perhaps the first questions that's important for us in order to get to know you guys a little bit better. Who's actually a game developer in the audience? Ah, high target group. That's nice. Who's a student? Some as well. Okay. Who works for publishers? Yeah. Okay, one. And who does other business with games of some sort? Okay, also a few, but a very development-focused.
I liked it that the students also said they were developers.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
They're very ambitious.
So perhaps to start with our panel and to start with a discussion, perhaps we just can do a small round. What was the last reveal or announcement that made you guys think, okay, this might become a game changer? Who wants to start?
Yeah, for me it was Stadia, of course. Yeah, that was a big thing.
Other opinions besides Stadia?
The last huge one for me, I think, was Unreal. And for us, it changed everything when they announced, and even every year when they're announcing smaller stuff.
You mean the Unreal Engine, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have something to add, Eric?
The last thing that really felt like a game changer for me was maybe the App Store. I know that was many years ago. I haven't seen anything recently that's new. I think part of what I wanted to talk about is I think a lot of the questions that we wanted to discuss today, we've seen before in the last couple of decades of game development. I'm not sure there's anything genuinely new, but I could be wrong about that.
Okay, that might be assuring for some of the people listening to us. So it's all been there, but still things are changing, and I think we'll see some disruptions in the way we develop games now. Perhaps they have been there before, but they are, I think, absolutely about to change now. One big thing which you don't have to be a rocket scientist in order to predict that, is subscription models. I mean, Game Pass subscribers are actually the most important KPI for Microsoft games at the moment. And all other bigger players are working on subscription models as well. What does that actually mean for game developers?
I'm going to answer something from the very indie perspective. I think that when we started the studio, the first thing the first funds we got were from Patreon, which is like Kickstarter, but a monthly thing. And for us, it was a huge difference. It was way better than, a one-time payment thing. It was suddenly people subscribing to support the project. It wasn't exactly a game subscription, but they were subscribing, to help the project out. Which creates a stable revenue, which is a lot better for companies, especially smaller companies. You know what happens every month, and it's nice.
Just a question, can every one of you hear him, or should we? Yeah, that's good, okay. Want something to add, Eric?
Well, subscriptions also are something that we've seen before, right? I mean, it was in I think the early 2000s of games like Warcraft and EverQuest. For kids, games like Club Penguin. I also think there's a huge, when we talk about subscription from the consumer point of view, they're paying something every month, if it's Patreon or if it's a streaming service that lets them access lots of games or a single game. But from the developer's point of view, those are all extremely different situations. It's very, very different, the idea of having a community of fans that supports your next title, or a single game that people have to pay over and over in order to play, or if you're kind of created content, which is then part of a larger service. So I think all of those have different kinds of implications in terms of how you would create games for that service.
Mm-hmm. Jens, you're working on huge AAA games, and at least the last ones you did had a big solo focus, on a strong single-player campaign. What are the discussions happening at Machine Games when talking about Google Stadia or subscription models or streaming?
Well, I think for Stadia, it's different people have different opinions, and it also, for me, the big question is: does it work as advertised, or reasonably close to as advertised? Because it's true, it's not new that people have come up with streaming services for games, but neither was the App Store a new thing. It was just executed right, you know?
That's why it was hard for me to answer the question, because I'm not sure really what the biggest actual disruption is.
Yeah, so the question is Stadia able to execute on what they're promising? And if they are, then I think it has a lot of potential to be a game changer. I mean, it's not a guarantee, because Google has launched projects before that has failed spectacularly in various ways. But I don't know, maybe we can poll the audience, like, if it works as advertised, in other words, you can have instant access on any of your screens to the highest possible definition version of the game you want to play right now, would you ever buy a console again?
I want to ask them this, but let's ask them another question first. How many of you subscribe to some kind of streaming service for film or video, for television? How many of you subscribe to 2 or more of those services, or 3 or more? Okay, so this is embedded in our media culture, but how many of you would do the same for games? You think? So maybe that's maybe that's it.
Yeah, I think.
And that's what Google's thinking too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of upside on the idea, because the install base, basically when they turn it on, they'll have an install base of, 100 million plus customers. And so you already have the console, all you have to interact with is the game. So yeah, I think that has a lot of potential, if it works. And I'm assuming then that it works, if you're able to play Netflix, essentially, then you can also use Stadia. That's what I'm thinking, but who knows?
Okay, with the App Store and platforms like Steam, we basically had an era over the past 10 years or so of self-publication. So basically every one of us was able to, if he is able to program or has a team, to publish a game within seconds or within minutes, and then it's there and people can buy it or subscribe to it or whatever. With these new streaming and subscription models on the horizon, it's probably safe to say that we will get new gatekeepers. Because not everyone will be able to get into the Game Pass program. Not every developer will be able to get access to EA Premier as a platform. Same with probably Google Stadia, who already said that their system will be curated in some way. So, what gates will come up, and what gates might be torn down?
Well, I think it will be obviously Stadia is very integrated with YouTube. So I think it's fair to assume that it'll be similar policies gating what can be published. And there is a shit ton of stuff on YouTube, so I'm not... but at the same time, of course, they have to position themselves at launch as something of high quality, right? So maybe it will be sort of a bit more curated at launch and then open up over time. I don't know, I'm just speculating, of course.
I think it's a great question, and about gates, I just want us to take the long view. I started working in the game industry when I was just coming out of being a student in the early 1990s. So at that time, this was 25 years ago, you could only buy a game by buying a physical product. That meant that to get a game into the hands of a player, in almost every case for video games, you had to manufacture it in a factory and then ship it and get it into a shelf, a physical shelf in a small game store or a big larger, what's called department store in the United States. So that was just a huge amount of work. It was a lot of environmental pollution, but it was also a lot of money for the manufacturing and the shipping, and also the having a sales team that would try and fight for that shelf space. There were thousands of games coming out every year. I know there's many more times that now, but there were only, let's say, a couple hundred in the largest stores places to actually display a game. So at that time, games were really a product, right? You would create it, it would be manufactured, and you couldn't change it. There was no patching service, there was no streaming or downloading service. The World Wide Web was very, very young then. It wasn't being used to update software content. Consoles didn't connect to the internet the way that they do now, although with a couple exceptions. So this is the biggest change, I think, in the game industry since I've started working there, has been this shift from, as people say, from product to service. That you don't just do this idea of sort of fire and forget, right? You launch a product, then you move on to the next one. You might have fans who are your Patreon subscribers. You might have a crowdfunding campaign. You might be doing content updates or patches over time, and you really are sort of nurturing this community. And the game itself is not something that's just created once, but it evolves and it changes and it grows over time. So in terms, I mean, the wonderful thing about this for democratization of games is that this is what's helped create indie games. Indie games was not a thing. It wasn't a term that was used or understood when I started working in the game industry, but it was digital distribution in large part that helped people create games that then you could go directly to consumers through Stream and the App Store and those kinds of distribution channels. So on the other hand, you know, there always were some gatekeepers, even some early examples of Xbox Live Arcade. You still had to work through Xbox. Steam is sort of now becoming more of a curated platform, and it's kind of gone back and forth over time that way. So, I think that it's probably what we're going to see as an ecosystem. That there's always, if you think about other forms of culture like music, there's always going to be places where you can find ways to sell directly to customers or find your fans. And there's going to be reasons and advantages to also working with larger players in the ecosystem as well. So I don't think it's either good or bad, but I think it's going to be more choices for us, which is probably a good thing overall.
Yeah, I think the interesting question is if it's good or bad. That's the big thing, and usually we tend to think that the less gatekeepers there are, the better it is for us, right? Like that's the instinct. But if you look at Steam, for example, is a great example. Like, was Steam better before Greenlight, or is it better now, where everyone can put it there? Is the App Store a good thing? I think it was better before. Also, music is a great example. Like, look at the music. It's like, on one hand, it's amazing. Today, anyone can do music, put it on YouTube, become famous, right? On the other hand, the industry is dying. You know what I mean? This killed the music industry. Being a musician in the 70s, music was doing a lot better when you had to have a label, when you had to have funding to have an album. So, long term, I'm not really sure that those gatekeepers is a bad thing if they're going to appear, and probably they will.
So if the ecosystem will change, and I think we all agree on that, what does that actually mean for game development and also games marketing? When I look at my behavior using Netflix, there's so much stuff on there. It takes me half an hour to find the movie I want to see or the TV series. So that I think that might raise all new questions for game developers as well. And also that was question part 1, and question part 2 is basically when subscription models will be on the rise. It's not about basically money anymore, but it will be a question of time for the player. So it's because you have your catalog of 100 games you are now allowed to play. Which ones do you pick? What does that mean for game developers?
Yeah, and it's not only games. Like when I was young, there were moments in my life where I was bored, and that has been abolished now. It's impossible to be bored anymore unless you're like clinically depressed or something, but for a normal person, just with your phone, you're able to entertain yourself 24/7. And that leads to an interesting shift in the market, because now everybody's competing for consumers' time. That's what it's about, really.
I think it's dangerous. One of the big questions is how the developers are going to be compensated for this thing, right? I think from, at least I know in our studio, like the first talk after the Google thing was like, how the hell are they going to pay developers for that? Because as far as I know, they didn't explain that. And if it's playtime, for example, we're screwed. And like our studio and a lot of others. If what we're starting to sell is game time, then like a lot of studios have a problem. Story-driven games are in a huge problem now.
Right, and playtime kind of goes directly against what you were saying about competing for consumers' time. But one answer to that is that, well, we could have more short play games, and we don't have to have these long games unless the revenue model is based on that. But I think that what this points out is that again, in this model, when games were just a product, it's weird to think about, but when I started in the game industry, we didn't have to think about the revenue model. The revenue model was there's a product and someone buys it from a shelf at a cash register. And it was kind of like a book. If you're a book author, you probably don't think, oh, how is someone going to buy this book? How is it going to affect the form or content? I mean, probably that's not even true anymore. But today, if you're a game designer, the revenue model and the game design, they're intermingled. You have to think about what's the free demo, or how's this going to make money? How can it exist on different platforms? How might it be a subscription model if that ends up being popular on this platform or that platform? So,
which is a big problem,
yeah.
Like potentially, because instead of telling the story you want to, a lot of the times you end up making decisions based
right.
on money, which is.
I mean, I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, while it's true. I think every form of art or culture has always had some kind of technological and economic constraints, right? I mean, that 19th century operas were written for a particular room, and the acoustics of the sound and the instrumentation are kind of for that space, and the attention span supported a certain revenue model, right, where people were sitting in chair and expected a certain kind of value for their money. So it can be dangerous, but I think maybe we can think of it as expanding what's considered game design. That for us to be more attuned to it. That also there's no way out. We don't have a choice, right? We kind of have to think about how, if we want to make a living or want to support a company, sustain a business from the games that we make, we also have to think about how the game is going to earn revenue as well.
Yeah, but there's also the thing now where if you're making a game, you're not just competing with other games, you're competing with everything. And they are competing with everything.
But that was always the case, wasn't it?
No, I don't think so, because if you went to the movies or you went to the opera or you read a book or whatever, that's like a compartmentalized experience. But now it's all available on device, on the same device. And it's zero friction in between the different things. So it's like I'm watching a Netflix thing, I get a message, check this thing on YouTube, I check the YouTube thing, and now I'm reading this thing, I go into Wikipedia, So we're competing with Wikipedia, and it's like everything's intermingled into the same thing.
We can beat Wikipedia, man.
Yeah.
Sorry?
So
we can beat it.
Yeah.
But I think it's very true what you're saying, and I think if you. For me, I think that there were a lot of art forms in the 19th and 20th century that were more about this kind of, let's say, a real immersive experience, like going to a film theater in a darkened room and watching a film. That's not the way we experience the moving image anymore, right? We experience it, as you say, alongside other things and social media channels and doing research and stopping and starting and fast forwarding to the end to see what happens and things like that. So I mean, there's a sense in which games I actually think that that's not a bad place to be for games, because games already are participatory, right? Games already are a social form, a form of culture that's very social. That's about interacting with people or interacting with a system. And so maybe, you know, maybe this isn't a problem for us. It just means that the kinds of games that we want to make can evolve to include this kind of experience. I do think there's still some nostalgia for immersive experience. That's what the hype around VR is always about. This kind of like, you know, immersion into an illusionistic world. I think it's very 19th century of people to want that experience, but I think there's still some people that want that as well.
Okay, that brings us perhaps to opportunities of the possible new ecosystems. We just, in the pre-discussion, we just came up with the example of Love, Death and Robots. Who have seen that on Netflix? Yeah, that's a target group. Yeah, I mean, who would have thought 1 year ago that short films might actually become a viable business model for streaming? What other possibilities, or what possibilities might come up for game developers? I know we are now in the crystal ball section, but I think that's still interesting to think about what new ways of doing games might actually be enabled by the new platform holders or the new ecosystems.
I don't know.
Yeah, for sure there is a very large element of unpredictability if indeed we are facing a paradigm shift with something like Stadia, because it will enable revenue models that we haven't thought about, and some genius out there is like figuring it out at the moment. But I would say that free to play is going to be very powerful in that kind of paradigm.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to say what the future is going to be, but I think that one of the good things as players play more games and there's these proliferation of service-based revenue models is that I actually think that we have to be more and more honest with our players and more straightforward with them. That in a sense that there's always a pattern when new revenue models come out, and people kind of put up with them, and then they're kind of start to be seen as exploitative and negative, and then people start resenting them. And you saw this, for example, with let's say an earlier, not the first, but the earlier wave of subscription models like World of Warcraft was a subscription, and it was great. You actually had to buy the product and then also pay a subscription fee. But then there were big debates and arguments in the game developer community. Grinding is unethical, right? That just giving players things to do that fill their time to extend the length. And we saw similar things in, for example, the free-to-play model, right? At first it seems great, you're getting a game for free, but then it becomes exploitative. Or in the kind of earlier generation of free-to-play, like a Farmville kind of model, where you're asked to kind of enlist your friends in order to advance, and that sort of thing. So I think that players often enjoy something that's new, but they very quickly are aware. They're very, very savvy consumers. And I guess the lesson for me is that you want to err on the side of being generous to your players and not instrumentalizing your players, which is hard because there's all new, kinds of game design that are focused now on metrics and player behavior and trying to figure out like how exactly to squeeze more dollars out of players in an economy. And I think that some of that is useful, understanding player behavior and designing through understanding metrics and how they work. But you also have to be careful that in the end, it's kind of like building a city. You can design a city for kind of short-term gain and efficiency, but is it really a place where people want to live and they're going to come back to over time? And that's a sort of a deeper understanding of what makes human beings happy and what pleases them. So we also have to remember the kind of human side of design as well.
Oh, that sounds very optimistic, but great. Yeah, I like that. When I was preparing this panel, I researched a little bit some parallels with the music and the movie industry, who sort of had to go through the same challenges that the games industry now is facing. And I found an article that really struck me, who was basically explaining based on facts how contemporary pop music had to reinvent its craft because of streaming, like Spotify, that now songs have to connect within 3 to 5 seconds in order that the user who's just used to just skip stays with the song, sticks with the artists, becomes a member of the family and the member of the community, and that actually had its impact on how at least contemporary pop music, if you want to go into the charts, had to be composed. We now have a member here on this panel who works a lot with music. And how did you experience that? And what do you think will be the impact on game development as a craft when you think about that?
I think it divides to two answers. So for music, for example, yeah, you're right. It's the rule today is to have like the musical hook in the first 5 to 6 seconds. It used to be 30 until a few years ago, and it used to be like 2 minutes in the progressive rock era.
You bought the fucking record, so you better enjoy it, yeah.
Yeah, and now like every song, like every pop song starts with the dee bomb, and this is like your hook, and then they start the song. That being said, this is only right for pop, so I think it's kind of the same for the gaming industry. If you're looking at a casual game that's main purpose is to make money, you'll get one answer. If you're looking at a higher quality game that has an artistic truth to it, you'll get a totally different answer. You know what I mean? And you always, in any form of art, have those two cases, right? And it's going to be different. So for the games that money is a huge consideration for them, which sounds bad, but it's not, because we all need money, obviously, right? It's probably going to be the same answer. Like you said, it's thinking about, hey, so okay, the guy is going to play this, and then he's going to jump to Wikipedia, so I need to like get his attention all the time and throw notifications all the time for him to go back to the app and do stuff. And I think it's going to be terrible because of one reason: we are good programmers, unlike other industries. Like, we know how to do this better than the music industry. We've proven it a lot of times.
Yeah, and I mean, even now they do like trailers for trailers at the beginning of a trailer, just so you have seen something before you click the YouTube skip
Coming
button.
in 5 seconds.
Yeah, it's just totally insane.
In January, I gave a week of game design workshops in China to one of these very, very huge Chinese game companies that own multiple studios, and they own some of the biggest Western studios. And the interesting thing is that, so those companies are doing genres of games like MOBAs and role-playing games that are incredibly informed by trying to figure out what is the formula for the best, the most popular, for keeping players, for getting the most revenue. But so it's very much driven by the kind of music production you're talking about. But I have to be honest with you, those companies are also terrified that they're not creative enough. So they also, the company that I was working with also understands that it's not enough to sort of chase these like tiny diminishing returns and figure out what the formula is, because the formula is always going to change, and it's pop culture. People's tastes are going to evolve, and anything that's established, in a sense, you're always going to be defining yourself by your cultural tastes against what not even what your parents enjoyed, but what the older kids enjoyed, right? That oh my gosh, that's like the old washed up, stuff that just doesn't sound good or play well anymore. So there is a kind of a natural sense to which beyond just trying to figure out from a marketing point of view what the next hit is or what the next revenue model is, there's always going to be a place, I think, for cultural innovation even within things that are meant to be just pop culture.
Also, formulas have one huge weakness, and that's that they can be figured out. And once a formula is figured out, it's, you know, you're looking for exactly the opposite. Like you're looking for something that is not the formula because suddenly everyone are doing it, and this keeps happening in every art form throughout history again and again and again. So.
And that's where machine learning comes in.
Whoa, it's somehow depressive.
There is still something ineffable to aesthetics and beauty and pleasure that can't yet be captured by machines, and I don't think it ever will be, right? So it's...
Yeah, but
I mean, can a machine tell us why, at this state, that, you know, the pants that were this far down looked fashionable, but then 15 years later, they didn't look fashionable anymore?
No, but what the machine can do is optimize against retention or revenue or something like that. And
but it can't predict dubstep. No machine learning would predict dubstep.
You're right about that.
Or Minecraft, yeah. So there's still some things, or there will still things happen that no one of us can even predict in their wildest dreams. I think we all kind of agree on that. So we now come to the last question.
But I just want to say on that, that's why I think it's, you know, a panel like this, if you're a young designer, can seem very disheartening because we're just talking about revenue models and subscription and things like that. But the encouraging thing for me is that the games that are winning awards and that are successful, not in every case, but in many cases are still the games that are clearly driven by passion and creative innovation.
So I actually have a talk about like that I give about the history of music, and I'm saying that whenever, like looking at music history ever, whenever something really big happened, like someone invented a new genre, changed how people listen to it, it happened exactly by those insane people that, you know, did something completely different that was completely weird, like dubstep, like, and probably the same thing for games. I mean, like, I always give that example. If someone can look me in the eye and tell me, like, yes, I saw Goat Simulator and I knew it's gonna be a thing, like, you're lying, you know what I mean? It's like, no one could predict this thing. And
okay. So following your passion and being weird is still a viable path for game developers. So but just know that most games don't make a profit, so it's okay if that happens too.
So Eric basically already answered my last question, which is great, but perhaps you still have another point. So my last question, since I'm always trying that our listeners get some sort of takeaway of some sort. So from your different perspectives, what are the main questions that game developers have to ask themselves when they start thinking about a new project right now?
Clarify for what purpose? For making profit? For doing something awesome?
That's basically to make them happy as a game developer, some sort of self-fulfillment, that they say after 1 or 2 or 3 years of development, okay, that was worth it.
Yeah, I think making games is so incredibly punishingly hard that if you're not 100% committed to doing it with all the fiber of your being, then it's not something you should be doing. Like, you have to really, really want it, and it has to be the most important thing in your life. And if that's the case, then, you know, things will work itself out.
I couldn't agree more. I think, yeah, it's will the moment when my company comes near a bankruptcy and it's 2 in the morning and I scream at people and they scream at me and I want to die, will I survive this because I believe in the project enough? It's exactly my answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure I 100% agree. I think that if you're starting a company or you really want to make a living at it, but would we tell people that are interested in playing music, unless this is the main thing that you're going to put 100% of your life? I actually think
there's a difference between playing music and making a living as a musician.
Right, but
so
we also...
I guess I'm talking about professional
game design, but I would also want to encourage hobbyist game designers too, right? I actually think that any form of design or being creative and making things makes you a better person as well. So, you know, and there's sometimes as a game, I mean, what if you are making really weird game, then it may be that you're committed to it, but it's your side project, it's your evening and weekends project that that might take longer to get out while you do something else for money. So there's lots of models for creative production. The starving artist model for game development.
Yeah, but you're not going to ship unless that's your thing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
like,
I do know what you mean. Yeah,
like it's fine
yeah.
to do it as a side. Like I have to make money at Starbucks, but I make my passion on the side. That's fine, but that passion project has to be infused by passion. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
I think that yes, that's a good way of putting it.
So it's all about passion. What a nice closing
I would say
statement.
Okay,
Yeah.
the only thing I would add to that is I actually think that another solution for what we're talking about, a lot of the challenges here, is by looking outside of games. Too often, I feel that game developers are inspired by other games, and that they're not looking at other cultures, like deeply looking at music, for example, as you and your studio obviously are. So I think that being inspired by forms of culture and design that are not just within games, but outside, that not only helps us find new audiences and innovate more, but also maybe gives us some other spaces where we can reflect on the revenue models and the business aspects of games too.
Okay, we now have, thanks so far guys, that was very interesting. We now have perhaps time for 3 more questions from the audience. So you have a perhaps combined 40 years of industry experience here, so.
Are there any questions about passion maybe? Yeah.
Hello. Well, it's a very interesting topic. It's quite impossible to understand what the future is. But one of the points of the game industry is industry and expressive media that is ongoing changing by technology. And the impacts not only in how you do games, but also how you sell it. It's too quick, too rapid to you figure out what you're doing. So these ongoing changes in the game industry makes very difficult to reproduce your success one more time. And that's one thing that I'm finding the game industry is more difficult than in other creative industries. So in your experiences, how does quickly changing of business models, technology, a way to make games struggles to the game developers, create another success, create another ways to express themselves by this media? How do you think about it?
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it? I mean, in one sense, that was, I think, to get into games, you have to enjoy the fact that there are generational shifts, and you're all the time facing new technological opportunities. And you're kind of embracing that as a developer because it's part of being a developer. But it's still incredibly hard to deal with, for sure.
Yeah, when I started in the game industry, people that would debate game design and are we going to ever figure out telling stories or things like that, they always used to say, well, it's like we're working in the film industry, but we also have to design and build all of our cameras every time we make a film because those standards are changing. And I think that that's still true today. But in addition, now it's as if they're also redesigning film theaters, and you don't even know where someone is going to see the film that you're making with the tools, and you're also developing, you know, the entire technologies of how someone is experiencing it, but also how they're going to, on the consumer end, end up purchasing it and paying for it and watching it. So, yeah, I agree. It's kind of, yeah, I think that this is why I say the human side is so important, because that is something that is changing, but less quickly, right? We're still human beings. We're still, the same things give us pleasure. We can still learn by looking at other forms of culture and how it is that people play with each other, talk to each other, interact with each other, how they interact with culture. So those forms of knowledge don't change. And if we can anchor our designs and our experience and our knowledge in those things, then the fact that platforms and revenue models are changing maybe won't change what's at the core heart of what makes our games meaningful to players.
Yeah, I'm going to give the naive answer that at the end of the day, a good game either has a really good story or a good mechanic or something really special about it. The rest is technicalities, like realizing how you're doing this and getting money out of it is a technical thing, and like trust Google to give you an answer at the end of it. Someone will, you'll find a way as long as the core belief is there. Again, as naive as it sounds, and the story is good or the mechanic is good or whatever is important in your game, you'll find a way.
We have
Fingers crossed.
another question over here.
Hello, thank you for the discussion. I have a question about the PC games in particular. How do you see the future of PC games in particular? Will there be a new hype, or are going the mobile devices to take over? How do you see that?
Well, if Stadia works, I think PC is like dead.
I mean, part of it is the question, what's the future of PC as a technological category? It seems to me that devices are becoming more blurred, right? There are tablets that are also laptop computers. There's phone devices that seem more like PCs. There's consoles that are more like handhelds. It seems like the lines between them are being blurred. What I'm curious for you is how is PC a meaningful category to you? Is it because you're developing for that platform? So is it more about the operating? I guess the question is it more about the operating systems or the hardware? Is it more about where someone is playing and why they're playing the game? Or or is it more about the tradition and history of games for PC? To you, what's meaningful about that category?
It's more about the device. I mean, we're also discussing about the future of the PC as a device, and we're discussing in the team whether we are going to, we're now developing a game for the PC, but we do not see any future, and I wanted to prove if this point of view is right or not, because we are thinking about changing our opinion and our point of view of thinking of designing games.
So so for you, the PC device is a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse?
Yes.
I think for the next 30 years, there will always be people like me who just won't play anything else. I will never play on the mobile. I don't know why, but I hate it. My PS4 is the most expensive Netflix machine ever bought, probably. So as long as I'm alive, at least, there are people like that who will play PC no matter what.
Yeah, but aren't those like the vinyl people?
The what?
Yeah, you're
The
like a
people who
vinyl. You
collect
listen to music on
vinyl
vinyl, right?
No. But maybe. I don't know how many there are, but PC Master Race is a joke, but it's also a thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I'm sure there'll be a few enthusiasts who you have to pry the keyboard from their cold dead hands.
Like, you know, I have a mobile, I have all the consoles because of my profession, and I only play PC.
And to me, the future I see is like what's going to matter is the biggest screen you have that's stationary in your living room or whatever, and your portable screen. And I don't see room for games, I'm talking about now. And I don't see the room for a PC in there. Like, you might have a PC because you have to use something to write on or whatever, but you're not going to be putting like the biggest graphics card in there because you're just going to use Google's graphics card.
No, that's fine, but I need a keyboard and a mouse.
Yeah.
As long as I have that, it's fine. And I think as long as...
But I mean, it's great that you asked this question because that's supposedly the premise of this panel and the whole summit today is the PC. But I think the question is, why I asked you is what is it that makes a game connected to the PC? I think you're right that in the end, there's a story or there's a mechanic or something. So if the thing that's special about your game is the story, for example, maybe that's not really a device-specific constraint. On the other hand, if it's really something about using a mouse and keyboard in a particular way, then that may end up being something that you really want to focus narrowly on. So it really depends on, but I also think that, you know, when someone is designing furniture, like the pieces of furniture that we're sitting on now, they don't just think about the material, they also think about where and how it's going to be used and how it fits into somebody's life and sense of style and and aesthetics. And I don't know what the intention was with these chairs, but maybe someone thought they're like
Put them on stage
for a
for a
very,
panel.
very, very fancy living room, or that someone that wants to have their living room look like a ship's captain chair or something. I don't know, but so I also think we want to think about our technological devices in a similar way, that how they fit into people's lifestyles and is what is essential about the game in and of itself, but also in how the game gets used and brokered among people. If your game is really about social interaction, maybe the PC isn't the best device for you. Maybe a more social technology platform is.
Yeah, but there's another factor here too, which is that PC gaming is an ecosystem which includes, Alienware and new hardware every year and Steam and all of that stuff. And that ecosystem is under existential threat.
Okay,
I agree.
So we have to make a cut here because people are getting hungry, and I think the lunch is about to be served. So thanks a lot. That was a very lively discussion. I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys did as well. Thanks a lot for participating, asking your questions, and have a good appetite.
Thank you, QUO VADIS.
Thank you.